Okay, we're going to return to James Buchanan's The Doctrine of Justification, and we are in Lecture 5 today. Lecture 5 is entitled History of the Doctrine in the Romish Church After the Reformation. All right, in this lecture, we're basically walking through what Buchanan says happened to the Doctrine of Justification inside the Church of Rome after the Reformation. And his big point is, more or less this, is Rome never really changed her doctrine. What changed was the strategy. Buchanan says Rome moved from open hostility to intentional vagueness to rewriting her own history, and then eventually to a very polished, modern reinterpretation that sounded more biblical on the surface, but it kept the old system firmly in place underneath. So before we get into the details, Buchanan reminds us of something fairly significant. When the Reformers began preaching justification by faith alone, that message exploded like lightning all across Europe. It brought relief to burdened hearts, burdened consciences, in a way that Rome simply couldn't match. And he wants that contrast front and center here in Lecture 5 because it shows what was really at stake. So part 1, Rome's initial reaction, which was open condemnation of sola fide. So the story starts at the Diet of Augsburg in 1530. The Augsburg Confession comes out and clearly teaching justification was by faith alone, based entirely on the righteousness of Christ alone. And Rome responds almost immediately. The computation, which was Rome's official reply, is read on August 3rd. And then the emperor's recess follows with a formal condemnation. Buchanan's point is straightforward. Rome knew exactly what the reformers rather meant, and Rome rejected it outright. There was no softening of language, no let's keep the conversation going, just a clean and decisive no at that time. Both sides understood the issue perfectly. There was no confusion in these earlier years. And then that brings us to the Regensburg Colloquy of 1541, which was the Buchanan's conclusion that this was the birth of ambiguity. Buchanan says the first real shift happens in 1541 at the Regensburg Colloquy, which is sometimes called Ratisbon. And this is where Rome tries a different tactic. The prior one wasn't working so well. So you've got Contarini and you've got Groper representing Rome, and then you've got Melanchthon and Bucer on the Protestant side. And together they produce an article on justification that at first glance sounded a little bit Protestant. It says, justification is free by grace through faith because of Christ's merits alone. That sounds fairly orthodox. But Buchanan says, that sounds amazing until you look at the one thing they refuse to define. And that was, what exactly is justifying faith? The Protestants said faith receives the righteousness of Christ, imputed, perfect, and complete, right at the moment of believing. And then Rome said, no, faith justifies only when it's formed by love. And justification itself is infused, not imputed. It's infused righteousness, something that grows as you cooperate. So for a very brief moment, both sides accept it, but Luther rejects it immediately. Rome's hardliners reject it immediately. And then the whole thing falls apart. And for Buchanan, this becomes the first major attempt to blur the line on the doctrine of justification, to give the appearance of agreement where no real agreement existed. Ambiguity is more dangerous than open hostility. Ambiguity is more dangerous than open hostility. The second part of Lecture 5, the Council of Trent. And this is the ambiguity with a systemic or systematic redefinition. Ambiguity with systematic redefinition. So now we get to Trent, and Buchanan says Trent perfected this strategy of ambiguity. Trent uses language that has an evangelical feel, and then quietly redefines every major term. Buchanan notes, and this is a quote, justification becomes both forgiveness and inward moral renewal. The formal cause becomes infused righteousness. Faith alone is anathematized. Works have merit. Justification can be lost and regained through penance. He also says Trent needed ambiguity because several theological factions were present. So the final statements used mixed language, broad enough to keep everyone, or to try to keep everyone unified. But again, Buchanan insists that the core substance never changed. Trent didn't reform Rome, it just dressed Rome up differently. Part 3, Rome's double policy. That's old Popery and new Popery. Not Popery, but Popery. Buchanan now introduces a really helpful distinction. After Trent, he says Rome basically runs two parallel systems. There's old Popery. This is the real Roman theology that was taught in seminaries. Think Bellarmine, Vasquez, Suarez. This is the infused righteousness, human merit, treasury of the saints, and so on. And then new Popery, this is the more softer, the more perceptually biblical, ecumenical version of Rome presented publicly. Think Cassander, Bossuet, Francois, Sancta Clara. And it's standing at the bridge between the two is Andradius, who tried to argue that Trent taught the same doctrine as the Augsburg Confession. Buchanan points to this as Rome's first major attempt to say the reformers just simply misunderstood her. His point is that the new Popery is not Rome reformed, it's Rome being camouflaged. Old Popery remains the engine under the hood. Part 4, Rome's reinvention of her past. As Protestants began publishing evidence of medieval Roman doctrine, Rome increasingly responded, hey, that's not what we taught. You're misrepresenting us. And Buchanan notes that Protestants in America began reprinting the old Rhymes New Testament annotations just so people could see what Rome had actually said. For Buchanan, this becomes a pattern. Rome continually rewrites her own past to make it appear more biblical while refusing to change the doctrine itself. Part 5, failed attempts at harmonization. Now Buchanan walks through a whole string of attempts to bridge the gap. Soto and Vega try to do that inside Rome. Desius tries to show Trent and Augsburg as basically identical. Bossuet tries to win Protestants back. Francis Sancta Clara tries to reinterpret the 39 Articles more in a Roman direction. And then later, Grotius and Leibniz attempt reunion talks. And Buchanan says all of these efforts fail for one reason or another. The disagreement wasn't small. It wasn't peripheral, as it's not peripheral today, and it's not something you can fix with clever wording. Rome says justification is the process of making a man inherently righteous. The Reformers say justification is God's legal declaration that the sinner is righteous based on Christ's imputed righteousness. Justification is God's legal declaration that the sinner is righteous based on Christ's imputed righteousness. Buchanan sums it up like this. The difference between these two systems is not one of degree, but of kind. And that brings us to part 6, modern reinterpretations, Muller and Newman. So moving into the 19th century, Buchanan says Rome becomes a whole lot more sophisticated. Muller reframes justification as restoring a supernatural moral gift. And Buchanan argues that this effectively removes guilt and it removes the need for a forensic declaration of pardon. And then Newman introduces the theory of doctrinal development. Doctrine grows and it evolves over time, and the growth supposedly shows some form of continuity. And Buchanan says that pretty bluntly, that development theory is simply a way of just justifying doctrinal innovation without admitting that anything has changed. Part 7, the authority of later papal decisions. Buchanan also reminds us that Trent is not the only binding authority in Rome. Rome had also issued condemnations against Bias and Jansenius, and then the bull Unigenitus in 1713. Buchanan says these all carried equal weight. His point is that any Roman theologian who gets too close to Augustine on grace gets corrected immediately. The Roman system simply cannot tolerate sovereign grace. Part 8. The pastoral consequence is that Rome leads souls away from Christ. So here, Buchanan becomes very pastoral. He says that the more someone absorbs Rome's system, the harder it becomes for them to rest in Christ alone. Rome directs the soul inward towards personal renewal, sacramental satisfaction, and priestly mediation, and all of that pulls the conscience away from Christ's finished work. But Buchanan is very careful. He says, God can certainly save people within the Roman Catholic tradition despite Rome, as he did with Martin Luce, but never because of Rome's doctrine. And then he gives this line. The more closely any system adheres to the principles of Rome, the more effectively it bars the door against the sinners resting on Christ alone. And then the conclusion. Buchanan's conclusion is pretty straightforward. He says, Rome's doctrine never changed. Only the presentation changed. So first it was just blatant and open rejection, and then that transitions into a form of strategic ambiguity, and then Rome seemed to suffer a sort of selective memory syndrome, and then there was, in the final stages, a more polished reinterpretation. But the core issue remained exactly the same. And then Buchanan ends with this line. A sinner is justified either by the righteousness of Christ alone, received through the faith alone, or he's not justified at all. A sinner is justified either by Christ's righteousness alone, or he's not justified at all. And that's Lecture 5. We'll transition to Lecture 6 next.